where we provide information, inspiration, and motivator after motivator after motivator. Here on America's Next, I have Ricardo Rodriguez here with me today. How you doing, Ricardo?
Well, yourself?
I'm doing quite well, quite well. Nice curtains. They've got me. They've got me a little bit like I'm. You remember some years ago in the newspaper there was this section where you could look in and then you could look out and then you will see a three-dimensional picture. You ever seen that
Yeah,
before?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's what your curtains remind me of. You doing all right though?
Yeah, doing good, doing good. Trying to stay inside due to the heat. It gets very, very hot in San Diego.
Oh wow, you in San Diego?
Yeah, beautiful San Diego.
Did you grow up out there?
Yeah, born and raised here. It's always been very, very good. A lot of people complain about, locations not having enough resources or things to do. San Diego doesn't really have that of an issue. One of our downsides, though, is that when it gets to be summer, it does get a little bit toasty.
Toasty, huh?
Yeah.
Hey, what was it like for you growing up out there in San Diego?
So for me, it was definitely very interesting, just because of the fact that it's in an area in the city where a lot of people come to move to, every year. For me, I never really thought about it because when you're growing up, some places you have a lot of resources. You don't think, about how good it is or where it is. But one of the things that I've always appreciated is just the ease of access in terms of transportation. Not being able to drive a car or anything like that, the system that we have in place for buses and trains is definitely something that makes it very easy for me to get around. So that's something I've always appreciated about our city.
Right, absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, as you pour in here, I just want to let you know, thanks for tuning in to America's Next Motivator. We're in for yet another inspirational story here with Ricardo Rodriguez. And I really appreciate you guys being here. If you have comments or questions, make sure that you drop them in the comment section, and we'll be sure to get to those as well. And let's definitely show Ricardo some support today. He's telling us that he's from San Diego. Now, when I think about San Diego, I think about the trolley. Does that still exist there?
Yes, it actually does. The trolleys itself here are actually very neat. A lot of them are very well maintained and they run pretty often. I know that back when I was younger, we didn't really use the trolleys that much as opposed to the buses because they really weren't implemented as well as they are now. But they're definitely a very good resource for me to be able to get around.
Oh yeah. Okay, so they're still using the trolleys out there. That's pretty
Yep.
cool. All
Yep.
right. Walk me through a day in your early childhood living in San Diego, California.
So for me, a day in my early childhood was very, very difficult just because of the fact that I was born very, very disabled. And in the 90s, there was a lot less resources for kids who were disabled out there available in the community compared to now. The very limited resources that they had made it difficult for me to be able to open up and just live my life the way a normal person would, because there was such a stigma on you have to do things a certain way.
Hmm.
There's only one way to do them, and if you don't do them the same way as everyone else, you're looked at as unusual or bizarre, really not something or someone that should be out in public. And the issues with that were not only was there a lack of resources for people with disabilities, but there was also a lack of awareness in terms of how to be able to speak to someone who has specific challenges and the sort of environment that they need to be able to be successful with those specific challenges compared to now.
Now, what disabilities are you speaking about?
So I was born with several disabilities. I was born essentially with cerebral palsy, mental retardation, ADHD, vision issues, and motor skills.
Okay.
Most of those have gone away or gotten better over time. I still suffer from some severe vision issues nowadays. But for the most part, there's been an increase not only in awareness to resources, but in technology nowadays that has allowed me to be able to live my life as a regular person. There are certain things that I have to do a different way,
Mhm.
But with the increase in technology and resources available, it's definitely a lot easier for me nowadays than it would have been growing up.
Right. What were some of the difficulties that you faced as a child with those disabilities? Let's say in school.
So for me in school, basically, it was always very, very challenging. I needed to get like special books and things like that for school. And because my vision was terrible, I couldn't use the regular books. The font size wasn't big enough for me to be able to read. Trying to read them would always give me a headache, so I would struggle in school. And there was always a delay in being able to give me the books that I would need. By the time I would get the books, it would be like an extremely thick book that would pretty much cover the whole table. By the time I received that information to be able to complete my studies or do my schoolwork, half the semester would already have gone by. So it made it really, really difficult for me to be able to progress with my schoolwork because my needs and the resources that I needed weren't being provided to me at a proper time frame.
Wow. So it took everybody a long time to catch up to your needs, and so that time lag left you hanging in the balance essentially.
Exactly. Like one of the ways that I had to do it is I had to find alternative means. I learned at a very young age, like I have to find alternative ways to be able to get the same information. If I can't get the information from the books because they're not set up for me to use, then maybe I can work with a friend or a classmate and they can provide me with the information in a way that I can understand to still be able to do the work. Which in one way, it's an ingenious way of doing it, but on the other hand, it's work that really should not have to be done.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you that the entire world needs to be prepared to raise and develop anybody from anywhere who's dealing with any of a number of challenges. I think everybody deserves to be able to do things in a similar fashion as everybody else, and I agree with you there. But I also think that it's miraculous that you learned the value of teamwork and and being able to work with people to get things done, because now I think that we live in a world where you don't always go to the person next to you for help or for insight. You usually go to Google, maybe even Facebook, Instagram, or something like that. But you, Ricardo, you learned at a young age the value of talking to the person next to you or in front of you, and coming to an understanding.
Yep, it was definitely something that I really appreciate nowadays. Like, as technology has improved, it definitely opens up a lot of possibilities in terms of getting information or resources, but sometimes those old ways work best. Reaching out to a coworker, a neighbor, someone in your community, they might know of a resource or something like that that could assist you that may be much more difficult to find online depending on, where you are.
Hmm. And what were some of the things that your parents did to help you along during these times?
So in my case, I was adopted by my grandparents. It was a very challenging institution, specifically because my grandmother never completed a third grade education in Mexico. Circumstances prevented her from doing so, but she always made sure that even though she did not know the language, when she raised me here in the United States, that she always was my advocate. She would always make sure that if there was an issue I was having in school, either because I couldn't understand the material or my resources weren't being met, she would always be the first person to go to the school and say, "Hey, my son is having issues with these challenges in school, with these classes, with these materials. What are the resources that you can provide for him, whether it's tutoring or extra time on assignments? What can you guys do to ensure that he has the resources needed to succeed in this environment that's already challenging enough with his disabilities?" So she would always go and she would always advocate for the resources that are necessary. And she didn't let the fact that she didn't have, a formal education or not know the language stop her. She was always the one in the corner saying, "I'm going to find a way to do it. It doesn't matter if I have to talk to the teacher or the assistant principal or the principal, I'm going to talk to whoever I need to so that you can have the resources you need to be successful. I'm not going to let you use your disabilities as a reason for you to fail and use that as an excuse, because I know you're better than that.
Absolutely. How did it make you feel to see your grandmother stepping up to the plate for you day in and day out?
For me, it was always something that was a inspiration, just because of the fact that if you think about the disabilities that I had from a very early point, at 3 years old, you're able to run, to walk, to talk, to do all the regular things a regular 3 year old can do. You know, Here I was at 3 years old, unable to do anything like that because of my severe disabilities. At 11 years old, I had the body of an 11-year-old, but the mentality of an infant. So I was severely delayed. It was through her work that I was able to slowly and surely start being able to understand the circumstances around me. And I was able to start developing the ability to speak and walk and talk very slowly. So as I kept getting older and older, I really appreciated all the work that she put into being able to raise someone who many people, and not only other relatives, but also people in the professional medical community, deemed I would be unable to have a normal life. But here you have this amazing woman coming and saying, you know what? Whatever the professionals say, what the doctors say, that's not going to be the complete diagnosis. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in the work. I'm going to put in the effort. I'm going to show him that even if he has to do things differently, as long as he's willing to put in the work and as long as I'm able to teach him little by little, then the outcome is going to be perfect. The outcome is going to be amazing. He doesn't have to be able to do everything in one go. As long as he can do things step by step, he'll eventually be able to do everything. It's just a matter of doing it differently, and that's okay.
That is the prime example of somebody showing unconditional love and a never dying commitment to somebody who they deeply care for. She believed in you. She believed in you. And if I heard you correctly, you said that at the age of 11 years old, you were somewhere around infancy in terms of your mentality.
Exactly. Because again, really delayed, and that's essentially what happened. Because of that, they did try to adopt me several times, but again, in the 90s, you have less resources available for kids in my disposition. A lot of premature babies weren't born, unfortunately, because again, the lack of experience in those areas, and it was definitely an issue. But you have someone here who is saying, regardless of what the challenges are, regardless of whether or not I have an education, I'm going to be able to put in the work. And even if it's hard, at the end of the day, he'll be able to be someone
Yeah,
that can go out in the community and be a resource, not only to himself, but to others as well.
absolutely. Um, how old are you today, if I can ask?
So today I am 28 years old.
28 years old. And so as you stand here with me talking right now, with great eloquence, might I add, clearly getting your point across. I'm proud of you. This show was made for you, Ricardo. It was absolutely made for you. You're a miracle. You're a
That's what
miracle.
they say at the hospital.
Yeah, you are a miracle. Now, where were your biological parents at?
So my biological parents essentially weren't in the picture. They would be in and out of trouble occasionally. The one time I did need their signature for a medical procedure when I was in the hospital, they weren't available. Um, so it's just a regular issue of, just regular bio parents not being in the picture. For me, I, in some regards, am glad for that, because it ended up, I don't believe my life would end up being the same if they had been in the picture. I believe that it would have gone a totally different route. But I just realized that in some instances, it's okay for them to be in the picture, and in some instances, they need to be in the picture. It all just depends on circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But you didn't let that stop you, though.
No.
So how did So as you began to find the resources that you need to be a successful student, how did you begin to perform, let's say, in middle school?
So for me, the school environment was always very, very challenging because it wasn't towards the end of middle school that I was starting to understand things that everyone else had learned for years. Everyone knows that 2 + 2 = 4. From a very early age. I was starting to learn all of that, and I had to go through years of information in a short amount of time because of my disabilities. So it was always very, very challenging for me. But I did have the help and the support of my mom saying, "Hey, we're going to get you in a tutor. It doesn't matter if you got to stay longer after your friends leave the school. Whatever we got to do to make sure you can stay on track, even if that means putting in more effort than other students your age, that's going to be fine as long as the end result is the same."
Hmm. So what was your social life like at that time?
So for me, it was very, very difficult just because of the fact that, again, less awareness of resources. In some schools, they have groups where they can put all of the disabled students together, and then you associate with other people who have disabilities who may be the same as yours or different than yours, but you have that sense of community, that sense of, hey, there are other people out there like me that I can talk to that know what it's like to have this particular challenge. In my situation, that at least for middle school, that wasn't really the case. I didn't have that resource, so it was very, very difficult because I was in a situation, an environment where yes, I had support in school, but a lot of the other kids didn't know what resources were, didn't know what it's like to live with disabilities. So it was a very, very challenging environment just because of the fact that they didn't really know. And when it comes to those types of scenarios, when people are confronted with things that they don't know, most of the time it's not usually a good experience.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, did you start to become a leader amongst your peers?
For me, that didn't really happen until about high school.
Okay.
Just because of the fact that in high school was really when the change happened. I was able to be more exposed to groups for people who were visually impaired and blind. So in that point, I was able to go and I was able to be around people who did have disabilities like mine, and we were able to congregate and just build those connections on networking. We could say, "Hey, this is how I do this. This is how I do that." Just kind of guiding some of them in terms of how to deal with certain issues that I had come across that for them, might be new. Because when you're dealing with a disability, there's a difference between someone who was born disabled and someone who becomes disabled later in life. I had already known how to interact with certain scenarios or certain items, whereas if someone suddenly loses their vision, they don't know how to do certain things anymore because their brain is programmed a certain way that they have to basically relearn how to do certain things.
Right, right. And so at about the high school range of time, you
Mhm.
became somebody who was a supporter of other people who are having a similar experience in life as you.
Exactly. And for me, like that's one of the things where like I really really grew into myself in some aspects of that just because it was the first time I was able to say, hey, at this level of education, now I'm getting my resources met, now I'm getting my needs met, I'm being exposed to these sorts of things that I needed earlier in life, and now is my chance to kind of use them and be able to make the best use of them.
Hmm. What did you do? What did you do for fun outside of school?
So for me, the things that I would try to do basically would just be, going out with my friends and trying to figure out what we would do. If there's a movie out there, what's the best route that's safe and accessible for us to get to? Are there any ramps or things like that to be able to go ahead and get into the building if we had a need to, or if are there going to be stairs? Because judging the distance from the bus to the stairs, that's always a challenge for us.
Okay.
So we always kind of look at that. And I started to develop a mentality of accessibility. Is this accessible? Can I use it? I started developing that skill set, just in my regular daily life.
Right. And so you weren't really looking for somebody to hold your hand everywhere. You were figuring out how you can do things your way.
Yep, that's one of the things that my grandma always instilled in me. When it comes to raising a foster youth, or much more so a disabled foster youth, a lot of individuals, depending on their condition, the relatives will say, "Hey, we're going to do XYZ so that way you don't have to do it." And the problem with doing that is that it takes away from their own ability to be able to be independent, because the parents will not always be there. And in the case of foster youth with disabilities, which is always a demographic that gets overlooked, a lot of people know the statistics in terms of how many foster youth age out. But if you ask them, what are the statistics about foster youth who are disabled? Most people don't know that information,
Right.
because they don't look at that. So in my case, my mother always made sure that I would be given the tools and the resources to be independent from an early age. So that way, when I did move out and I did become independent and I did have to go out to an event or something or learn how to cook or whatnot, she would tell me, hey, you have these particular challenges. Here's how you can work with them to be able to do things the same way, whether it's cooking or, looking up a route to how to use the bus or whatnot, or employment. She was like, there's a different way for you to do things, and that's fine. Let's go and let's look at what those different ways are, because it doesn't matter if you have to do them differently as long as the result is the same. And that's the one thing that she always emphasized. It's okay to do things differently as long as the result ends up being the same thing.
Absolutely. As I've also been told, there's more than one way, to get to the end goal. Somebody might think that 3 + 1 is 4. Another person might think that 2 + 2 is 4. But as your grandmother said, it's about the end goal. And so doesn't matter if it takes you 1 year to get something done or 10 years to get it done. If you get it done, then I look at you with the same merit, sometimes even more, because you
Right.
overcome such a great hurdle. Ricardo, I want you to take this opportunity to make this stage yours and encourage a young person in foster care who might be disabled just like you, and they might be watching one of these episodes, or maybe they're not in their foster care, but they're disabled, they're growing up, they're an adult, they're disabled. Talk to them.
Brother or sister, as someone who has lived the foster care experience and overcome their disabilities, I am letting you know that it is possible. I'm someone who was born unable to speak, unable to walk, unable to move, unable to understand the world around me. And here I am, a success and an inspiration, and working for other foster youth with disabilities. You have the same potential that I do, if not more. The world is yours to shape however you see fit.
Excellent. Excellent. Can you give us some numbers? Any statistics on disabled youth in foster care that we might not know?
So right now, basically, I unfortunately don't have any off the top of my head. However, when you look at the statistics for foster youth that are failing, a lot of them who are disabled, most of the facts are going to be because they don't know the resources. When it comes to resources for disabled youth, there's a lot out there that you don't know, because a lot of them are nonprofit based or with organizations.
Okay.
And when it comes to resources in schools, a lot of times when they'll have fairs and they bring in other community members or community organizations, the majority of the times when it's a career day or career course exposure, they don't consider alternatives. They always bring in the for-profit institutions. In my exposure, I never once saw during my school age time, whenever they brought in a nonprofit or anything specific to resources for disabled foster youth, they would put the onus of responsibility for that on the parents. mostly because of the fact that it's considered the parents' responsibility to be able to look into those resources, even though there are departments that are geared towards providing those resources in a school environment.
Right. Right. Um, Again, I think that your perspective is very important. I see you as somebody being able to affect policy and raise tremendous awareness about youth who are disabled in the foster care and child welfare sector, and kind of honing in on the fact that we need to make sure that while they might be a smaller percentage of the overall population, we need to make sure that they get special care. And I'm nominating you, Ricardo Rodriguez, to continue to do great things for disabled youth in foster care. I think that's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely awesome. And so, ladies and gentlemen, take some time out to share this stream. Locate America's Next Motivator TV show page. We're talking to Ricardo Rodriguez, and this man is not finished. There's more to the story, and we'll be right back after this brief message. America's Next Motivator. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern. America's Next Motivator. Hosted by me, Cedric Riley, and sponsored by the Pride Empowerment Network. And we're back. How you feeling, Ricardo?
Good.
That's good. That's good. So, talk to me. What was your life like as you look forward to graduating high school? What was going on in your life, and what were you most excited about?
So for me, high school was a very challenging time. It was one of the times when I received the most resources, but also a time when I realized that I wasn't really being set up for success in a high school environment.
What do you mean by that?
I realized rather quickly, personally for myself, that I wasn't really being taught things that I would be able to put to use in the real world. Personally, for me, I always figured, like, why am I learning about math equations that won't have any personal application in the real world, as opposed to learning what a resume is, as opposed to learning what a credit score is, how to land a job, things that actually do have an impact in the real world that my parents couldn't teach me, because the fact that they wouldn't be able to know or describe what an interview process is, and I didn't have individuals around me who could tell me, hey, this is what an interview is, this is what the clothing options are, and this is how you go ahead and you land on that. For me, one of the pivotal moments happened towards the end.
Okay.
We had I had a computer class where we learned Photoshop and things like that. Because I told my instructor, "Hey, I want to learn the computers. I want to learn how to fix them. Is there anything that we can take that will teach us that?" And the best that they did was Photoshop. And one of the days that we were in class, the person that actually came in to repair the computers came in, and I asked my teacher, "Hey, I know they're leaving, but can I go? Can I talk to that person? I want to learn how they got into computers and how to start that career." And I was told, "Sit down, or we will send you to the principal's office for being a disruption in class."
Wow.
Instead of being given the opportunity to kind of grow and mature and be able to get a little bit of information in terms of how to get into that sort of career, I was being told in an institution that's supposed to enable my thirst for knowledge, no. I was being punished for legitimately seeking something that would have been more beneficial than what I was being taught.
Hmm. Did you ever feel like people were treating you a certain type of way because they perceived you to be handicapped?
For me, it didn't really feel that way at the time because I was in a place where, for the first time, I was being given the proper resources that I needed.
Okay.
I had someone teach me how you go about and how do you look at things from a perspective of someone who is visually impaired, regardless of whether that's how you get on the bus or how you get off, or when you're looking at something as crossing the street, what are the signs to look for. I would always be taken out and provided those resources that I needed. In my case, I think it was more so the way that the stigma is, where we just hurdle and cattle all these youth and tell them, you have to go to college to be successful, you have to go to university to be successful. If you don't go to university or you don't go to college, you're never going to be successful, because that is the only path to being successful. That is the only way you're ever going to be able to go ahead and earn a paycheck. If you don't do that, then you're not going to be able to amount to anything in life. And
Hmm.
for me, that sort of mentality from my experience with the teacher showed me there's a different way to go about and be successful. I just have to be able to go and find out what that is, to find my own definition of success. Not what other people tell me success is, but my own definition of success. And I
Sure.
was able to find that.
Sure. Did you read any books along the way that helped you to expand your mindset?
For me, it wasn't really so much so books, because at the time they didn't have a lot of the technology that made it easy for me to read.
Mhm.
Nowadays they do,
Right.
but
So,
at the
so
time,
let me
um,
let me rephrase. Let me rephrase that,
or-
because what I meant to say was,
like,
what role did storytelling play in your development?
ah, so that basically enabled me to be able to be my own voice,
Okay.
to be my own advocate. Based on my own experiences, I knew what my needs were and what resources I would need to be able to be successful. So it gave me the opportunity to say, hey, this is what I need to be able to succeed in this environment.
Hmm. Were there any stories that you heard growing up that inspired you to believe that you could become what people thought was impossible?
For me, one of my heroines is always Helen Keller.
Okay.
Born deaf and mute, she was able to go on and do some amazing work.
Hmm.
And I always looked at her as an inspiration for the work that I would be able to do in the future as I got older, because I looked back and I see, my time compared to hers, it's vastly different, but she was still able to go out and do something that even back then, like, even now, or at least when I was growing up, it would have still been considered supremely difficult to do, but she was still able to succeed.
Hmm. Absolutely. I remember reading the story of Helen Keller, listening to the teacher tell the story, and just trying to understand the shoes that she filled. And from the beginning to the end of the story, I felt like she overcame such huge challenges that it
Hmm.
empowered me to believe that I could overcome huge challenges as well. And
Yeah.
for those people who might not know, I spent years of my life in foster care as well. And a lot of the experiences that um, you talk about, whether or not you're adequately resourced along the way, I can definitely identify with the idea of overcoming adversities. Now, have you thought about telling your story to others?
So that's actually part of what I do now. So a lot of people, if you ask them in care, they'll say, "Hey, how was your relationship with your social worker?" They'll say, "Oh, pretty bad." In my case, nowadays, even over 20 years later, I still work with my social worker now.
Hmm.
I teach classes around adoption. So I go and I facilitate and I'll tell them about how to build a relationship with foster youth. And I will tell them this is how you build a relationship with foster youth, specifically with youth who are disabled or have specific challenges. You have to approach it a different way. So I emphasize on the fact that youth with disabilities or specific challenges, I like to call them, have different needs, and there's different ways to be able to approach raising them compared to other people. But the one thing that I always emphasize is just taking time and building that relationship with them, because a lot of parents who are raising foster youth, especially those with disabilities, are under the assumption that they can be raised the same way as they were raised. And the misunderstanding with that is not only are you raising someone who is from trauma, you're raising someone who, for example, may have challenges walking. They may have speech impediments. They may be blind like I am. They may have issues being able to communicate the way that you normally would. So that requires modifying your ability to be able to approach that situation in a different way. And for some parents, it is challenging for them to do, because you're going against so much of what you know as a parent, or what you were taught. But for the ones that are able to adapt and change their mindset, I've had parents come to me years later and be like, "Hey, what you taught me really helps. My kid is now going to college. My kid is now going to high school. They're doing what you're doing now."
Right, right. Are you able to give me any tips or teach me anything today about working with youth in care?
So for me, the one thing that I would recommend is, just never assume.
Okay.
Never assume you know their story. Never assume that they're going to turn out a specific way. Always be willing to listen. Always keep an open mind, just because of the fact that your interactions with them will be able to go ahead and affect everything else.
Okay. That's great advice. Making sure that you are helping them to get to where you believe that they can be.
Exactly, because at that point, even if they only have one person who believes that they have the potential to be more, that one person is all it takes, because in some instances you can have two outcomes. You can believe what everyone else says about you, or you can go ahead and you can not believe that and work your own way to be able to be successful. It is possible to do it the second way, but in some instances, that's how people have to do it. But it's always a lot more efficient if you have at least that one person in your corner to say, "Hey, they can be successful. I know they can. I'm going to be rooting for them."
Mhm.
That one person can make all the difference.
Absolutely. Now, I recently saw you doing an awareness campaign, and I thought it was very profound. Can you talk about some of the work that you've done in the community?
Sure. So I've been a foster care advocate for a number of different years with several different nonprofit organizations. Currently, I am an adult supporter for California Youth Connection. I represent and support the San Diego chapter. I've
Okay.
also done a lot of work with Just in Time for Foster Youth, representing them in San Diego. And currently, I do some work for the county, training foster parents by being able to go ahead and letting them know, what the needs are of youth with disabilities, and being able to go ahead and just build that bond. Currently, I am in the process of creating my own nonprofit to give technical training to foster youth to help get them employed in technology. So, for example, if you want to learn how to fix computers like I did at one point in my life,
Right.
or if you want to learn how to build a website, or make a mobile app, I can go ahead and I can teach that to the youth. And the goal is to basically get them employed in that environment without the need of going to college or university or any of those other for-profit or higher learning institutions.
If you could, if you could make one change in the child welfare industry to benefit youth who may be disabled, what would it be?
For me, it would most certainly be just ensuring that there are more resources available to
Like
them.
what?
So, for example, a lot of social workers have to go out and they have to know, what the resources are for youth. They go out and they go to events. The problem with that is you're not going to know of every single event out there because there's always so many. Like in San Diego, for example, there's lots of resources for disabled youth, but none of them work with each other, so you don't know of them. They're all spread out. If there was one central way where every single resource could be available for them, you just go there and you look for that resource, everyone has access to it. You're no longer looking or failing because you don't know where to go for the information. My change would be making that information available to every single social worker in the US to say, hey, if I have a youth who has cerebral palsy, where do I go? Oh, you go here. What about a youth who is mute or hearing impaired? Okay, you go here. And then there's also resources for this here. Basically just like a giant database or resource where they can find resources locally for any single disability that they might have.
Right. Now, you mentioned that earlier in your life, you were interested in tech, you were interested in software and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And it sounds like you're still interested in that today. Did you ever develop expertise in that area?
So I actually did. So as I mentioned, I always wanted to get in technology, but I wanted to avoid the for-profit route that everyone said, where you have to go to college because the only colleges available were at the time were ITT Tech or Coleman colleges, the for-profit institutions.
Okay.
And in my time, being low income, I didn't really have the means to take that. So I found a training program run by the nonprofit, the San Diego Futures Foundation, that at
What
the
was it called?
time was hmm?
What was it called?
The San Diego Futures Foundation.
Okay.
At the time, they were running a program specifically for low-income disabled youth who wanted to get into technology. I would be learning a lot of the same things that I would be learning at a for-profit, what the components are, how to fix a computer, and it was all free. They would basically pay for my tests. They would instruct me on everything. Once I finished the program, I would be given a paid internship and help with job placement. I finished the program. I had a year to do the training material. I finished it in 5 weeks. I was the first one in my group to get certified, but technically, I was the last one to finish because you were only allowed one internship. I got three, you
Wow.
know? So it put my foot in the door where it stayed true to my belief where there's a different way to be successful, and I took that path to get into technology. And nowadays, I don't really do so much IT work because I've moved away from that. But I've learned in the intermission how to build websites and how to build apps. And my current project right now is to build a national foster youth app. So, for example, if you're leaving California and you're going to Florida or Georgia, for example, you can use the app to look for those resources, whether they be, help for finding food or help for finding a homeless shelter or, what are the youth programs available in my area. The end goal is you use that app, you download it onto your phone, and that will give you resources to be able to find that. And it would also have sections like, hey, what is a resume? How do you build credit? How do you apply for a job? How do you fill gas in a car? Those things that people don't really consider or don't look at, foster youth don't know. So my end goal is to have all that information available in the app once I have it completed.
That is phenomenal. If I can ask, where are you in the process of developing this?
So right now, I would say I'm about halfway. I have access to a very exhaustive list of resources that I can put in the app. I'm working on resolving one particular issue that I am looking into. Once that's done, I do anticipate I will be able to have that completed and available for Android.
Really? Do you read books on coding? Do you
So for me, I do a lot of the coding that I learned essentially was through community programs. So the website track that I took was specifically in Los Angeles. It was done by a nonprofit called Urban TXT. They were specifically looking for youth who were from foster care to learn how to build websites, just to show that they could, to show that they weren't a disenfranchised population, that if you give them the resources, they can be just as successful. And the other program was one that was funded through a grant, so I could learn those skill sets. I did find that the skill sets that I learned there were helpful to keep me to teach me the basics of it. It didn't quite teach me everything that I needed for the app, so for that I did have to do a little bit more studying. But it's definitely going to be able to help a lot of people once I get the program finished.
Sure. Hey, listen, I think that this is a huge story. How you went from being pretty much at a disadvantage to not only overcoming many of those disadvantages, but you maintained the confidence throughout your young adulthood that resulted in you becoming a leader and a resource for other people. And now you're using technology to advance youth and families in foster care, and you're getting toward the halfway and finishing point of the goal that you set out to achieve. So
Yeah.
congratulations to you. How can somebody contact you if they want to contribute to your project or learn more about your project?
So for me, they would be able to go ahead and look me up on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I'm also available on Facebook as well.
Okay.
And I'm definitely looking for anyone who would potentially be interested in being a board member for the nonprofit that I hope to build that'll give foster youth access to technical training to bridge the digital divide that affects a lot of foster youth.
Hmm.
As well. Because for me, like those are the key aspects that I want to be able to focus on, being able to give foster youth an alternative route to success. Because it's not always college or the degree that will get you success. A lot of people always like to assume that I'm anti-college or I'm anti-university. And for me, knowledge is knowledge, regardless of how you obtain it. My view on it is it's not okay to funnel people only into one direction without having them verify, hey, these are the other options available. Let me explore those and see if they're right for me instead of just going straight to the college route because that's always what I've been told. I've never been given exposure to anything else.
Hmm. Hmm. You know, I'm like I'm processing the things that you're doing right now, and I see such a need for them. I think that technology is the absolute key to making foster care a better experience and a better system. I think that technology is the way. And
Mhm.
I see you at the forefront of that. So I want to let you know that. Where do you see your organization and your work 3 years from now?
So for me, I hope to have it be established definitely nationwide. My goal for the nonprofit that I hope to build would be to have it be nationwide because foster youth is an issue that affects the entirety of youth in our nation. So for me to have my nonprofit be able to go out and give these youth a skill set that not only is very high paying, you can get a really good job without a college degree through this route, but also from hey, there's other routes out there than I may be exposed to. So for me, the long term goal would be to first expand to Los Angeles, after San Diego, and then kind of just go from there to have one branch of my nonprofit in every city and state. to be able to keep showing that success is what you make it, and it's all right to do it a different way. I don't have to follow the traditional route because that's not the only route that's available to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, is your grandmother still living?
Yes. So my grandmother is still very, very living. She is very, very active.
Yeah.
She's retired now, so I always tell her, you know what, it's my turn to take care of you. You know, you just gotta sit down and relax. You've earned this. All you gotta do is just sit on the couch and watch your soap operas. You don't gotta take care of anything. No dishes, no cooking. I'll take care of that. And
Wow.
my mom, she's like, no, I can still get around. I can still be active. I'm still young. You
Uh,
know, she definitely always been a go-getter.
yeah. Well, I asked that because I know she must be extremely proud of you these days.
She definitely is. She definitely it's definitely a team effort. There have been occasions where I go and I train foster parents, because I've done it for a number of years, and she comes in and she makes it a family activity. She provides her own perspective and says, "Hey, this is my perspective as a parent who raised, a child who everyone said, who medical professionals and other families said he wouldn't be able to understand. This is my experience on how to do it
Mm-hmm.
and how to approach certain things that are going to come up."
Right.
Because for her, it was always a challenge. We
Yeah.
weren't able to communicate when I first came into the picture because I was so disabled. I came from an environment where they only spoke English, and she came from an environment where she only knew Spanish. And when you add on top of that the cognitive ability, where even if we were speaking the same language, I wouldn't be able to understand, she really did an amazing job.
Yeah. 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 Now, are you looking forward to um doing things that you haven't done? Do you have a bucket list? What's on your bucket list for the future?
So for me, I would definitely like to be able to go to Japan, for sure. That's like number one on my bucket list. If I had to choose one thing on my entire bucket list to do, like that's the one I picked right there. Everything else can kind of get taken off. That's the one I'm doing. You
Why? Why?
well, for me, I've always loved the culture that they have. It's very polite culture. I like the food that they have as well. They have really one of the best public transportation systems in the world. It's always on time. It's very, very rarely late. From what I know in my studies, it's one of the few places that I found where you can literally get anywhere in the country on their public transportation system. There aren't a lot of locations that I've been able to find where the same is true of any other country. Usually, it's like you got to take a plane from one part and then a train. But
Hmm.
with them, it's totally different. You can get on a train in one part of the country and end up the other end as well. It might take a while, but it's doable. You know,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
just really
Man.
admire that system.
Wow. I remember some years ago I was reading about this train that was being produced that was ran by magnets, and the magnets were making the train like exponentially faster than the traditional methods of
Yeah.
locomotion. Do you know anything about that?
For that one, no, I know that I believe that the trains they made in Japan, the way they were designed, they move faster because there's less resistance from the
Mhm.
wind. So they do that does allocate to their speed as well. But for me, like I've always just been fascinated with public transportation, primarily because it's the only way that I can get around, but also just because of the fact that how it can connect so many different people. It gives you access to locations and resources that may not have been available before.
Yeah, that's interesting to me. You find Japan to be such a great place because in your world, public transportation is absolutely key to you having a good experience. And
Yep.
Japan has a top of the line public transportation system.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. Some of the things that, some people might take for granted, you never know who looks at that which you take for granted and places it as a high priority in their life. So, I've learned a lot from talking to you today. It's been great to meet you. I hope that our viewers out there have learned a lot, have learned tons. The policymakers out there, make sure that you get your mind on youth who are disabled and care for all of the parents and social workers, Don't ever give up on a young person in care because they have what you or doctors deem to be a handicap. Because when you look at a story like Ricardo's, he is a case study that you can even if by the time you're 11 years old and you're still operating at the level of an infant, you can still become somebody who's developing technology, completing educational courses, learning new information. Man, there's so many positive things to say about your story, Ricardo. I just want to really appreciate you for that. Now, I have 3 questions that I'd like for you to answer for me in about 45 seconds to a minute as we round our base here. The first is, what is survival to you?
For me, survival is being able to have the means to succeed.
What is success